You ever level up in Genshin? If you're anything like me, which conveniently I am, it's been so long since you started playing Genshin that you've completely forgotten most of what it was like to play the game for the first time. But one part of early Genshin that I've never forgotten is that you used to level up, like just naturally, walking around, exploring, killing enemies, and then your traveler would be all like, whoop, I'm level 5 now. After the beginning parts of Genshin, let's be generous and say once you finish the Mondstadt storyline, overworld experience effectively ceases to exist. The only way you're gonna be leveling up is by farming for paper that you shove into your characters. But every time I've done a video talking about Genshin's game design, I always remember just how nonsensical the level up system is. To show what I mean, let's start by looking at levels in video games can be traced all the way back to the originator of the RPG game genre, D&D. And I'm sure I could fumble my way through a 9th grade level English class essay about the origins of levels in video games, but I'm pretty sure it's just as simple as being a way to simulate the character of the game getting better at fighting over time. In other game genres, player skill can kind of emulate this, since you'll get better at playing the game as you play it more. And I mean, in RPGs you can strategize better than inexperienced players, but give little Timbo and esports champ Jonathan a Wurmple that only knows tackle and string shot, and I feel like you wouldn't really be able to see any difference in skill and experience. So, levels help simulate your character getting stronger over the course of your journey, and being able to beat enemies that previously felt impossible, or go back to the starting area and commit a nuclear detonation on enemies that gave you trouble before. So now let's take a look at Genshin. Genshin isn't a turn-based RPG, first of all, so player skill can already emulate the feeling of your character growing stronger, but you can also give your characters better weapons and artifacts, or even increase the strength of specific attacks. And you could even argue that unlocking new characters is an upgrade to your overall strength, since it lets you form better teams for whatever you need. On top of all that, the Traveler unlocks a new element every region, so that also symbolizes our protagonist, specifically, getting stronger throughout their journey. So having a level up system at all feels unnecessary, but the system itself also makes no sense. You primarily get EXP from the paper book things I mentioned earlier, and the game absolutely drowns you in them for doing basically anything. Of course, they're quite convenient because you could get 100 EXP books from exploring, and then use them a few months later on a character that didn't even exist when you first got them. But while having an item be practically the only source of EXP in your game is pretty abnormal, I want to specifically look at how pathetic this source of natural EXP is. Like most games, you can get EXP from enemies, but, well, a level 1 hilly troll only gives 10 EXP, which is already pretty bad because it takes 1,000 to reach level 2, but don't worry, a level 90 hilly troll gives a massive 20 EXP. Like, oh boy, I only have to kill 50 hilly trolls to reach level 2 now, yeah. Oh, and getting from level 80 to 81 takes 180,000 EXP, so you're gonna need to kill 9,000 hilly trolls later on just for one level. Okay, but that's just hilly trolls. Those are basic early game enemies, so I guess it makes sense that they only give you 10 to 20 EXP. The problem is that the amount of EXP you get from an enemy doesn't depend on the type of enemy, it only depends on its category. It doesn't matter if the enemy is harder or not, at the end of the day, all enemies in the easy enemy category will give you 10 to 20 EXP. Elite enemies give you 30 to 60 EXP, triple normal enemies. Normal bosses give you 138 to 200, which is a very weird starting amount. And weekly bosses will give you 276 to 400, which is double normal bosses. And none of these are really good either. For reference, the smallest EXP book gives 1000 EXP just by itself, which means it alone outranks the EXP from all enemy types combined. I know it's supposed to be harder to level up later on, but that's so crazy that obviously you just can't even consider killing enemies an option to level up at that point. But what about Exploration EXP? At the start of the game, your traveler gets to level 2 as soon as you unlock the first Mondstadt statue, so I guess unlocking a statue should give you at least 1,000. What? Okay, well, Exploration doesn't give you any EXP. At best, you'll get some books from chests, but that's not really what I'm looking for. So why do you level up from that first statue? Quests. Just looking out over a cliff and then walking over to the statue gives you 500 EXP each. I never realized this. Maybe I'm just dumb, but I never noticed my characters leveling up from quests outside of the statue one, so I just assumed it was for unlocking the statue. But in fairness, the EXP you gain from later quests looks like this. Books again. The last quest to give raw EXP is the end of Mondstadt's Act 2. But that wouldn't really be an issue unless you were trying to only level up naturally, and I kinda doubt anyone would want to do that. One day, when I was really bored, I guess, I made a second Genshin account where I'd only play the game by leveling up automatically. That was a mistake. I didn't research how to get EXP or what it would take to level up because I didn't really realize that I had to, but since then I've gotten curious just how long it would have taken if I didn't give up. Fortunately, because there's so few ways to get EXP, we can pretty easily calculate how much EXP you'd get in a week from doing every boss fight that the resin limit allows. You only have 1,260 resin per week, but 120 has to be used on the 3 weekly bosses you get to do. Those will give you 828 to 1,200 EXP total. That leaves us with 1,140 resin to do 28.5 normal bosses. We'll ignore that you can't do half a boss and just count it as half the EXP amount for one boss. This means that you can get 3,933 to 5,700 EXP from normal bosses in a week. Tragically, there's actually a quantity limit on easy and elite enemies too, so theoretically I could quantify how much EXP you'd get for beating all enemies on the map, but thankfully I won't. There's really no good way to accurately quantify how many enemies there are because some of them are listed on the interactive map but don't actually respawn. Some of them just don't give EXP for some reason. Some of them do respawn and do give EXP but aren't listed on the interactive map. And of course, the moment even one enemy is added anywhere, the numbers would change drastically, so let's just stick to bosses. That means, going off of the 2 highest end EXP amounts from bosses, since those are cleaner numbers to work with, you can earn a total of 6,900 EXP. That means it'd take a bit less than 4 weeks to reach level 10 from level 1. That's bad, but not as bad as I was expecting. The real issue is that it would take an additional 14 weeks to reach level 20. Which, is more than a year. Skipping to the end, it'd take 496 weeks, or 9.5 years, to level up a character just from 80 to 90 on boss experience alone. Funnily enough, before I realized that calculating EXP from enemies was not very accurate, my very rough estimate of how long it would take to get from level 1 to 90 with enemy EXP was just 5 weeks. So if you're trying to level up your characters naturally, don't skimp out on the enemy EXP, I guess. Okay, you get the point. Genshin's level up system is painfully slow unless you're chugging books. But at that point, why does Genshin have natural EXP in the first place? To be honest, this is mostly a rhetorical question. I can understand having levels in general because maybe there's some gacha game psychology thing with needing to invest more into a character even after you pulled them, but having natural EXP that's practically worthless is weird no matter how I think about it. I do have a very speculative idea for why though. Maybe the reason natural EXP exists in the early game is that it's familiar, immediate feedback to the player, rewarding them for playing. Slowly, the game introduces the statue level and adventure rank as different avenues of progression so that eventually you're motivated to play the game to progress in those systems instead. But it still needs that grounded, familiar starting point of, oh, I just leveled up, to kick you off at the start before you learn about all the wacky new stuff Genshin has to keep you hooked. Or it could just be because the early stages of Genshin were kind of a mess of game design as they figure out how to actually make an open world game. I wonder if HoYoverse could rework Genshin's leveling system at this point. Would they give it some small tweaks like they did when porting that system to Honkai Star Rail? Or would they remove the system entirely? Okay, they probably wouldn't remove the level up system entirely, but I still want to explore that idea. Obviously, you can't just straight up remove levels from the current Genshin landscape, but if levels were gone from the very beginning, I think it could work out pretty well. There's actually a lot of other ways to get stronger already that I mentioned near the start of the video. You might have to make enemies scale more slowly or make good artifacts and weapons more accessible from normal exploration, but I think it could be done. In fact, late game players practically already play as if levels aren't a thing. Once you're hovering around the level 80 range on your average characters, levels only serve as a down payment on new characters that you gotta do before actually making them strong. So removing levels would just speed up the process of building a character without bypassing it completely. But what about ascensions? Without levels, ascension materials like boss drops and local specialties would be worthless, which, isn't great. When your new character requires drops from the brand new boss and flowers from the brand new area, you're encouraged and rewarded for exploring the new content. So I guess keep ascension requirements and just let players ascend without needing to level up, since there'd be no more levels to up. But I know HoYoverse wouldn't want to get rid of levels because I think they're doing exactly what they're intended to: make you spend more time playing the game. To get level up books, you can either explore for chests or do quests, or you can farm ley lines, which takes time, and resin, which you may have wanted to use on something else, which means you'll have to come back later to play more when your resin is back. So in that way, I guess their weirdness is justified. Like, it makes no sense for usual game design, but that's because it's not intended for a usual gameplay experience. It's designed to be a toll you pay but never think about, to tap into all the advantages a level up system could have for the monetization of a gacha game, while limiting it enough to not have too much of an impact on all the other avenues of revenue. Or, hear me out on this, maybe I'm just thinking too much about a poorly designed level up system.